Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the LGS Pod, the Soccer Shorts companion podcast, where we try to shine a spotlight on local stories about grassroots soccer culture here in our hometown of San Diego, as well as across the U.S. and around the world. I'm John Cross, founder of Soccer Shorts, and back with us after a week absence is our usual co-host, Dylan Wilson. Dylan, how are you doing?
Good to be back. I'm doing well, and it's heating up a little bit, but it was nice to get away to the mountains for a few days. How about yourself, John?
Doing well. I actually, I'll start with, I guess, maybe a little soccer watching. We've mentioned before that I don't really have a team that I follow overseas. I kind of loosely follow Bradford City FC because that was my late father's team. And I enjoyed watching their run to get an automatic promotion spot from League Two to League One. And I've always just followed them in the distance, no matter what was happening. But I don't know what happened over the summer with their run. I followed a little more. I got up early, watched their first game because, well, it happened to be on TV, right? Because I have access to it. And I enjoyed watching them earn their first victory in League One for a while against Wickham. But I was genuinely surprised at how excited I was for the match. It was weird. It caught me off guard, and I'm looking forward to, I guess, watch some more games. So maybe I am slipping into having a team to follow a little bit, especially now that I can watch more games. So I was a little caught off guard by that, as somebody who's always been kind of not really following another team somewhere else because I want my local team, right?
Right.
So I was a little surprised by that.
Well, that's good.
In a good way, I guess.
Yeah. That's fun. I mean, it's if you're going to get into a team overseas, that's better than your average American English soccer fan. So nice.
Well, speaking of people who are into foreign teams with the Premier League getting ready to start back up, and not so much about the Premier League, but what are your thoughts about Sun coming to LAFC?
I'm actually pretty excited about it. I guess my position as a MLS hater kind of allows me to kind of approach this differently than another San Diego Spurs fan might. But yeah, I mean, he's given everything to the club. So he got to go, the club let him go where he wanted to go, and then figured out the transfer fee afterwards. And it sounded like he had LAFC in mind pretty much from the jump. There's probably a lot that goes into that, but I would suspect some big factors being that rich and famous athletes seem to really like living in LA, and Koreatown there is, I think, the largest.
I was going to say, strong Korean population.
I think it's not only strong, I think it's the largest Korean diaspora outside of Korea in the world, unless I'm mistaken. So it's one of, if not the biggest. So I think that probably had a big factor to do with it. And while I don't think the commercial considerations has ever driven his career decision making, it's definitely, he's always made career decisions that were also good commercial decisions, I think is a better way to put it. And this is just another one in that long line of decision making. So yeah, I'm excited. I love Sonny. I think he's he's obviously an excellent player, but he's a good dude too. He strikes me as a good person, which I love to see. So yeah, it was funny. I was joking with some of my friends, so we're going to have to go see the LAFC versus San Diego game, and we'll probably end up rooting for LAFC. So,
yeah. Yeah, well, I don't know. I still haven't, as we've mentioned multiple times on this podcast, I still have yet to see an event at Snapdragon. So
yeah,
maybe.
Well, I've never been up to the bank or whatever they're calling it these days.
Yeah, I haven't. Haven't either.
Yeah, I might try and get up and go see a game.
All right, before we get too far, I want to make just a quick update from our last podcast. I don't know if you got a chance to listen to it at all, Dylan, but last week, for anybody who missed it, kind of did a deep dive into player registrations and transfers and looked at the history of professionalism in soccer. Which is going to tie into some of the things we talk about today, and just looking at this big summer transfer season that we're having, and this kind of consolidation of monies at the top of worldwide soccer and a few powerful super clubs. But we'll get to that a little later in the episode. What I do want to make is I got a couple comments back about a comment I made in the episode referencing the NASL. So pre-Bosman ruling in 1995, there was generally in a lot of leagues, in a lot of tournaments, this limit on foreign players, which we talked about. And most common number was three foreign players on the field at a time. And I mentioned the NASL. One of the unique things about it was that it didn't really have those restrictions. So that's why you could have so many players there. And I had a couple of people point out that the NASL did have restrictions. And yes, it did. It didn't start with really any restrictions. The restrictions didn't come in for about 10 years. And when they started, and I want to point out a funny thing in all of this here in just a second. Let me double check my notes here. So in about 1978, so about 10 years in, an Americanization movement kind of started, and they limited the roster to no more than 15 foreigners and no more than 9 on the field. So still, I mean, for the times, that was a huge exception. Eventually, that worked its way down to the final year of the NASL, where you could only have 11 foreigners on your roster and only 6 on the field at the same time. But even still, it was much different than what the rest of the world was doing. And so when we talk about the cosmopolitan New York, well, the New York Cosmos in the name, but the cosmopolitan nature of the team and having all these different international players come and play there, that really was an exception that made the Cosmos special at that time because of those lack of limits on foreign players being on your roster. So I did want to acknowledge the fact that I didn't say in our thing last time that there were any restrictions specifically. A couple of people did point out that there were. So I did want to kind of give that correction to what we did. But funny side note to this, and I've saved the page all the way through, as I went to just double check my notes. And let me see if I can pull it up. I don't know how well you can see this, Dylan. I don't always use Google. I use some other DuckDuckGo and some other things, but in this case, I quickly jumped into Google. I typed in NASL Foreign Player Limits. And I know there's a lot of flack about AI stuff. And for those who are maybe just listening on the audio stream, I have on the screen here my actual Google search. And Dylan, you can see what I typed in. The actual AI overview is pretty good, but what I want to show you is what actually comes up after this. So it's got all the correct information here in the top part, but when you get to the actual links, everything is nasal foreign body, problems with nasal foreign bodies, all the way down to where at the bottom of the Google page, they give you like 8 to 10 different suggestions that maybe you're looking for these things, all about nasal foreign bodies. And I don't know if that means we have a huge epidemic of people getting things lodged in their nasal cavity, or it's a reflection of my personal searches in Google and the algorithm. But I found it highly unusual for the search terms that I did that the AI got it basically spot on, but everything else that popped up as what it thinks I might want to look at or was entirely off base.
It's funny how it seems, from my perspective, it feels like the overall quality of Google search has gotten worse so that we can have this AI chatbot at the top that's only right about 75% of the time. So it's just like all around worse.
And I hate that chatbot thing. I only typed that because I was really going to probably go to the Wikipedia page for the NASL just to do a quick double check or do some springboard links from there. And that didn't even come up. Yeah. It was all foreign objects in the nasal cavity. I was stunned. I mean, I think it's a hallmark of our time right now. But yes, it's one of the things that get me more and more frustrated with services like Google that I used to love a decade ago, and not as much anymore. All right, sorry, that was just an aside I wanted to throw out there because I found it highly unusual. Yeah. Okay, well, we usually do some kind of world international news here at the beginning, so just a couple quick things. In our ever, I guess, increasing attempts to make this the best World Cup possible next summer, Saw that Donald Trump is considering banning Brazilians.
Oh,
I
I
don't know
didn't
what that
see that.
means
No. Yeah.
exactly. That if it's certain Brazilians or others, but there's some articles about that. There were additional articles about the State Department charging some people on whatever list that they have. So I'm guessing it's countries like a lot of our Central American countries and a lot of African countries. But basically, we talked about on a previous episode how there was like a $250 charge, you might get it back. But now for some countries, it's going to go up to a $10,000 bond for adults and $5,000 for kids that you'll get back supposedly at the end as long as you don't overstay your visa. But absolutely going to prevent some people from coming in, especially when we're looking at hosting not only the World Cup, but then the Olympics coming up a couple years later. And I mean, the best World Cup ever, right?
Well, it's hard not to think that that's by design. A pretty coarse grade filter for keeping out the undesirables, right? So I don't know. I
Yeah.
mean, tourism is gonna die in this country, but it doesn't really seem like anybody making the decision seems to give a crap at this point. So I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll see
I,
what the state of this country is come next summer. I think we're getting ahead of ourselves here a little bit.
we are. Let's switch over to the Euros quickly. That have finished. Now, I did not see a single match for the Euros, which
I watched the final.
I was disappointed, one, but also it was a little bit of a personal choice not to do the Fox route, but also,
Yeah, fair.
looking at some things newly retired of not overextending my subscriptions, even on the Spanish side. And, that was some decisions, but I feel like, well, let's go ahead. We'll let you talk about the final for a second. The stuff that I saw for highlights, saw a ton of highlights because you can get those all over the place, really seemed like, for a neutral, maybe quite a fun tournament. But I don't know. What were your thoughts? You got to see the final.
Yeah, I actually watched it in Spanish. It was on Fox Deportes as well, so I didn't have to listen to the English broadcast. So I didn't really understand too much of the broadcast. I get bits and pieces, but it was a really exciting game. The final was very well played, high level of play, and you got a couple of like heart and mouth moments you get in finals, even if you don't really have a rooting interest, which I didn't. But yeah, I mean, it was like you said, it was a highly entertaining game on the field, and because I had the Spanish broadcast on, I was able to ignore a lot of the other nonsense. So, highly recommend that if you are like me and barely speak Spanish.
Well, one of the things I wanted to mention about, I don't know if it was the entire tournament, I think it might have been, but definitely for the final, that visually impaired fans were able to get a descriptive audio commentary of the match. And I don't know if it was through like an SAP channel or something, but they were able to get, and it seems like this was one of the first times for a major tournament that they offered that. So different than just kind of like a radio broadcast, just
Right.
a lot more visually descriptive for anyone who might be visually impaired. And again, just thinking to myself, it's something as someone, I'll admit, as someone who doesn't think about this all the time, because other than wearing my glasses, I don't have huge problems with my vision. I take it for granted, certainly. But when I read about the story in One Football, and I thought, like, why aren't we doing it in today's technology and everything? Why isn't the standard procedure with everything? And maybe it will be for most things, but the article made it sound like this was groundbreaking stuff. And on the one hand, I thought, yay, cool. But on the other hand, I thought, well, why did this really take so long to do something like this?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's the willpower, and unfortunately, it is true that most people just kind of don't think about these sorts of things. And unfortunately, it's true that there are a lot of people who just think, oh, well, why would a visually impaired person want to watch a sport? Like, it's not. I remember it was like maybe 10 years ago, the Baltimore Orioles did a promotion for the National Association for the Blind, which is based in Baltimore, where they had the Orioles jerseys were written in Braille. So like obviously it's, you know, blind people can't see it. I get that, but it's meant to like, you know, that, and obviously this is not quite the same thing. It's meant to promote the cause though. And I remember the reaction to that was kind of like really gross from a lot of people that I think of as pretty open-minded folks too. Yeah. But it just goes to show what I'm trying to illustrate is how like even people who think of themselves as pretty open-minded people, like just it does not even compute the idea that like a visually impaired person might be trying to watch a sport. It just seems like something that doesn't make any sense to them. Which like on surface level I get, but is just obviously a really overly simplified way of thinking about human beings. So I'm not surprised it took this long, but I'm glad we're getting there.
Yeah, hopefully we'll see more of that as a trend. To stay, well, and I think that might have been specifically the broadcast in England. So I'm not sure that was broadcast around the world. But to stay a little bit in English soccer for a couple of these next stories we have, on a, I guess, negative note, the group Kick It Out, that was formed in Britain in early 90s, 93 maybe, to combat racism in football, right? And over the years, it has evolved to combat lots of things besides racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, all those things. So they just came out with a new report saying that most of those things are generally on the rise. I found it interesting. The one thing that was not on the rise was homophobia. And they didn't make this connection. I'm going to make this connection. I think, because I see the same thing in this country, that people have just kind of pivoted away and focused that hate on the trans community right now.
100%.
That's not really, I would certainly argue that is not necessarily an indication that things are getting better with regards to homophobia. I think it's just been placed for the moment in a very narrow area, because we see it in our country and a lot of hate directed in that direction. But sexism, other things, race, all the things were kind of up. And I don't want to dwell on that necessarily, but which is going to be a little bit of a theme of this episode. I want to point out some things where, yes, we may see this overall and it's a problem and we do need to fix it, but there are people who are doing things to try to fix this. So I just want to get your thoughts. There is this ownership group. Apparently, I don't know them very well other than reading this article in Attitude. And we'll link all these things in the show description. But apparently, the husband and husband married couple, they own a rugby team. And they've done a lot to promote awareness about human rights issues just in general, besides just the LGBTQ plus issues. But they've recently also bought a very lower league, and I can't remember what tier, maybe the ninth tier or something super low, but bought a football club in England as well. So kind of spreading that around, and good to see that, just trying to bring some human rights issues and awareness into the sport. So, I mean, I think if you're willing to look around, and we'll highlight another one in just a second, but there are a lot of cool things happening at the grassroots level around the world. For as much as, and we'll do this later in the episode, complain about what's going on at the top level and the consolidation of money and power, there are still some amazing things happening at the lower league levels. And I think we need to spotlight those a little bit more so people are aware of it and not just have all our focus always on Europe and the big clubs.
Yeah, I think, okay, there was a lot to unpack.
Yeah, sorry.
But no, you're good. I actually, it's funny because I've had this thought a lot recently, how it does feel like, on the one hand, all of the homophobia and things that were swirling during my upcoming and kind of political awakening, really around the argument around gay marriage, right? And a lot of those, that hatred and that vitriol and bigotry has been repackaged and redirected at trans people, and and so in some ways it feels like not a lot of progress has been made, but in other ways, like the idea of gay people being married is so much more regularized or normalized than it was 20 years ago when I was, coming into high school and like becoming aware of these conversations. And so while, yeah, society has, in a lot of ways repackaged and redirected and, you could argue distilled that hatred as it's directed at trans people, it does feel like the idea of being like an outward homophobe, like in public life, is, I don't know, it still feels like a little ridiculous to me as far as we've backslid in some other ways. So that is, I'm building to a point here, I promise. So it is kind of an interesting, I don't know, dichotomy, I guess you could say, where it's like are you like cutting out any of the hatred or are you just redirecting it? Like, I don't know. It's hard to say. I'm not like qualified to make that determination, but it is an interesting observation. But that is what I'm getting at, though, is that I think the reason you're seeing lower league clubs feel emboldened to do those sorts of things in this kind of modern day and age is because they represent their communities more directly. And this is why you and I always talk about our love for the USL, or why we want an open pyramid, is that a club who knows that their people believe these things feels much more comfortable taking that stand because they,
Right.
It is the people who believe it. So I'm not surprised that you get a little more radical inclusion in some of the lower leagues, just simply because even though there's a lot of other reasons for it, but I think really at the base of it is if a community is radically inclusive, their club is going to reflect that. And we don't really get that in kind of the big, super money, top level sports world that we all live in these days. So it's a nice kind of reminder of the appeal of the other end of that spectrum.
Right. I agree completely. And I will say till my dying days that any club that connects directly with their community, however they do that, but strongly connects with their community, will be a successful club, no matter what level they're on. And we're going to talk about Vermont Green a little bit later. But I think that is the key. I do want to comment about a couple of things you said, also reflecting back to my days of being in a high school classroom as a teacher, because I'd have these conversations with my dad. And I don't remember if we've mentioned this before, but my dad, like many people's parents in their older years, seem to slip deeper and deeper into the Fox media universe. But I remember having some conversations how, like, my dad as a person, especially in his old age, would get very up in arms about these things we're talking about right now. And I would say even to how wrong some of these things are. But or talk about like, it's unfair to kids and they're going to be bullied and teased. And I'm like, it's not the same at the high school level anymore. I mean, most kids are very open. Like they don't even bat an eye. They're used to all of the stuff we're talking about right now. And they're comfortable with it is why they don't bat an eye. It's not a big deal. It doesn't really mean anything unless you are trying to make some kind of, or build some kind of hate out of it. You're attacking or going after someone. And not to say that stuff doesn't happen at the high school level. It still happens, but it's a way more accepting environment. And I just want to add the caveat. I think part of our experience also is living here in Southern California.
True.
And,
Yeah.
and we're not the only place. We're not saying it's only because here, but I mean, I've noticed it every time I've traveled to other places or things have happened, experiences I've had outside of Southern California. And it just, and not only watching the news, but then reminds me how different, I'll say, maybe politically, the other communities may be, or how they see some of these issues than we might see them. I mean, I'm on the show right now with the locals pride jersey on, right? And I've never, ever had a comment. Oh, let me repeat, I've never had a negative comment about this. I've only had a handful of comments ever about wearing the shirt, and usually it's something positive. I've never had anybody do anything, say anything negative, nothing. And again, I think that's just part of the community we live in. And maybe the circles we hang around in as well.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, so one last note on this, but another, to me, feel-good story. As we're hearing all these trans issues in sport, usually focused more on trans women participating in sport, there is a story out of Spain. A new trans men team has formed that's made up of all trans men. And they got their club together over the last couple of years. They've entered what is the equivalent of the 5th tier in Spanish leagues in one of the Catalonian cities. I can't remember where. But they've started. They're looking for a coach, and and getting people to come out to matches. And right now, when I looked up their scores, they're getting slaughtered. But they've made their own lower league team, and their kits are basically like the trans flag stripes. Like they have the hoops, but it's the trans flag. And they've, again, connecting with a community and getting people out and saying, well, hey, we've got a lot of them, because of the changes in laws. They had started playing women's sports, at least at a young age, but wanted to live their life as men. So they've decided to form their own men's team. They got together. I think this is a fantastic, again, way that soccer can be used to connect with not only just your maybe immediate community, but a broader community of like-minded people, and put a team together and go out there. And again, in all these stories of all the negative stuff we have, if you look, there's tons of stories like this around the world that I think are fantastic. And we need them to start at these grassroots levels, so they not know that necessarily that the team is going to work its way up, but we start making this that it's not special. It's not something that people like, oh, look how novel, or that's a great idea. It's a thing, and it's out there, and nobody bats an eye. And I think also over time that slowly works itself up the system, because someone's not, I don't know, trying to break some kind of ground at the highest levels, and then you just get all the worldwide hate directed at somebody.
Well, and I think as even the mere existence of trans men tends to expose the absurdity of the trans panic. But this as well.
Right.
Imagine if this team was trying to play in England and they were forced to then participate in the women's pyramid because these trans men were all born women. It's like everybody would rightfully recognize that as ridiculous. But it doesn't, it just, that logic isn't applicable in the inverse to these people for whatever reason. But it just, it goes to show how ridiculous all of this is, really.
I know at some point we'll be beyond this. And, this is one of those, I was going to say bump in the road, but that seems so callous. It is one of those low points. And I know there's going to come a time where it's going to get much better. I just can't wait for that. I hope that comes a lot sooner than later. And, we can start having some better conversations around, and as people say, well, let's get back to the sport. Sure. It would be great if people weren't such assholes all the time. It would
be cool if all you weirdos would stop talking about genitals and just let us play some football.
Yeah, seriously. All right, let's switch over to some Cup news. And let's go international here. First of all, I don't know about you. I've been very, very loosely following this FC Santa Clara from the Azores, which, over the last few years have risen up through the ranks in the Portuguese pyramid system. And they finished 5th last year in the first division in Portugal. So that qualified them for these early rounds, and they won their first tie. I think they have a couple more to go, but there's a chance, I think it's the Conference League that they're getting in, I'm pretty sure. But
yes, that's correct. They're through to
a couple more. A couple more rounds. If they can make it through, they can make it into the Conference League proper, and it would be kind of cool for some team to play their matches out in the Azores. So I love these stories of these small, tiny island nations of, not always nations, but these clubs, but on these small islands, and looking at that, also a very tiny place can have high level soccer, and depending how people want to invest and what they want to do, and it also gets me thinking, and I don't want to go off onto too big of a tangent on this, but our U.S. soccer PLS system of the different requirements and city sizes and everything else, but. I just, it's one of those stories I'm following in the background, just crossing my fingers, hope they do well. And I think that always adds interesting storylines to a bigger continental tournament.
Yeah, it's actually funny that you bring that up, because I had that game was on my radar as well for a couple of reasons. One, because as you mentioned, they're a very far-flung island community that is playing in a top flight division, which is always kind of interesting. Similar with, I think it's Las Palmas on the Canary Islands, who are sometimes in the Spanish top flight. It's kind of, you like to see them do well. But this game's also on my radar because I always just keep tabs on Croatian football, just because I have a soft spot for Croatia. And I saw a lot of chatter, actually, that the fans of Varaždin, who were the team that Santa Clara beat in the second round, qualifying round, they just beat, they finished like fourth, I think, in Croatia last year. We're very unhappy with the hospitality from the Santa Clara fans out in the Azores, which I thought was really funny. But they also lost, so maybe they're just being bitter. But anyway, yeah, so they're into the third qualifying round. There are 4 qualifying rounds to make it into the league phase proper. They have Larney from Northern Ireland coming up in the next round, so you would fancy them to maybe get through that. In a similar vein, though, my brother and I always keep tabs on Icelandic football in Europe.
Yes.
We went to Iceland together and really enjoyed it. And they unfortunately couldn't squeak by, but a team from Akureyri, which is the only city of any sizable note in Iceland outside of Reykjavik, it's like 10,000 people, and it's easily the second largest city, won the Icelandic Cup for only the second time, I think, last year, which qualified them to the Conference League knockouts. And they were eventually knocked out in the second round by Silkeborg of Denmark, 3-2 on aggregate, extra time in the second leg. But it was just super interesting to watch because in these first 2 rounds, the UEFA has 4 stadium categorizations, right? A, B, C, and D. A and B being the top levels. In the first 2 qualifying rounds, Cat C stadiums were allowed. So had they won, this team from Akureyri would have had to play their subsequent games in Reykjavik, because that's Iceland's only Cat B stadium. Okay. But this early round was played at the Reykjavik Sports Complex, which is basically a grass field with like a grandstand set up in this, tiny but second largest city in the north of Iceland. And it was just really interesting to pay attention to, because even Silkeborg's not a huge club in Denmark, but the financial disparity between these clubs was so obvious. And, it probably just meant everything to this tiny little community. So it was cool to kind of see that sort of thing in the same vein as Santa Clara, just these far-flung communities that manage to find their way into these competitions. It's a lot of fun.
Right, and those things work, again, because there is even within European club soccer, there is some kind of promotion relegation. There's a way through your own home leagues, home country, that you can work your way up to then qualify, and depending where you qualify within that league, to be able to qualify for different stages of European competitions. So I think that's what allows the connection, the excitement. Otherwise, I don't know how many people would show up to watch. It's like you got to play another team in an basically international club competition, a continental club competition, and and everybody comes out to support the team and see how they do, because it's connected to something bigger that people are a part of. And this is that connection aspect that is very important. And I'm gonna bring it right to our next story. I don't know if you saw it, and frankly, I have to open up the. Do I have it here? Yes, Seaford Town. I was trying to remember the name of the city, but a small club In England, Seaford Town qualified for the FA Cup proper this last weekend,
Oh, cool.
which broke a 100. They are in the ninth tier of the football league, and it broke a 104-year drought from the last time they were in the FA Cup. They were last in the
Wow.
FA Cup in 1911, 1912 season. So, and then if you're doing the math and you wonder why, that's only 105 years because we missed through the wars and stuff playing some of those club tournaments. So, but 104-year absence of getting into the FA Cup. So I thought that was kind of cool. Again, another exciting story, and you're at your grassroots level and leagues and playing, and then you get into this cup competition that has stronger connections up and down the entire pyramid. So I
Well,
thought those
even
were a couple good stories from the weekend
the
here.
cool things about that sort of, the amateur lower league clubs getting into these tournaments is even if they don't win that first game, the windfall from that will fund the club for at least a few months, you figure. And if they can somehow pull off a victory, I mean, they're looking at a year or two's worth operation costs right there. So it's like, it can really make all the difference for these clubs.
Or, I mean, even for some clubs that don't, for whatever reason, have their sights on really advancing rapidly up through the pyramid, like we're seeing a club like Wrexham doing, that, like you said, that financial windfall and help could help improve the grounds just for a significant period of time. So it's not all about everybody wanting to climb the pyramid all the time.
Right.
Sometimes it can just be a little bit extra and just bring your community together.
Sometimes it's about getting the primo mushy peas of the chippy chip of the ground rather than moving up the pyramid.
That's right. Okay, and bringing it back to the U.S., deadline day for the applications for the 2026 U.S. Open Cup qualifying tournament were yesterday. So as soon as they see all the teams of the people who want to be in and be a part of this qualifying tournament, and as soon as the teams, I think yesterday was also the day that teams had to decide who got an automatic qualifying bid, like those League Two teams and the NPSL teams, to say whether they wanted to accept those or not. So we should, over the next couple of weeks, I think the 21st or the 26th, one of those dates, I believe. I think it's the 21st. We should have everything finalized, and U.S. Soccer and probably the cup.us website will start publicizing who we have that have actually qualified and what the format is going to start looking like for the qualification tournament for any team that wants to enter. Now, I didn't look at the qualification. I don't know if you had to pay or what it is, or meet certain stadium requirements or anything else to be a part of this. But we should have some news around the 2026 Open Cup. At least the first 16 teams that have automatically qualified. We know a couple of them already. We know Vermont Green, which we'll talk about in just a second. We know El Farolito and why am I blanking out? Westchester United. Those are the three teams we know that have qualified based on, being the champions of certain previous events, and we'll figure out those other teams and know very soon what at least 16 teams will look like and what the qualifying tournament will look like, and maybe we'll luck out again and get some local San Diego, some of our UPSL clubs in there, and we can get out there and watch some Open Cup qualifying tournaments.
Yeah, fingers crossed. That'd be fun.
All right, before we get into the lower league news, just some quick San Diego things. NPSL starting back up again finally after their break for Copa America and the Euros. The Wave also made a couple of signings. I know you go to some Wave matches and things. Any thoughts about the Wave as we get into the second half of the season here?
I've actually been a little bit disconnected from the Wave just because I know they had like a long summer break or something for tournaments going on, and
Right.
I've been traveling, so I actually haven't been to a game in a long time. But but I know there's been some wheeling and dealing on the roster. But I truthfully, I don't know the league well enough to really have an idea, the quality of those signings, if that makes sense. So.
Well, I don't either, unfortunately. And the only other wave news about that is they're unfortunately back in the news again over this lawsuit that's been going on here for a couple of years. So we'll save some, other than just mentioning that things might be flaring up again from that. We'll maybe revisit that in another week or so when there's some more news. There's just some disappointing aspects coming out from specifically the NWSL and their position on all of this, which maybe a legally sound position, but morally, when you look at things, is I think comes across a little reprehensible about kind of abdicating all responsibility for what happened in San Diego, basically coming down to the fact that this lawsuit that's going to revolve around sexual harassment, because the complaint never mentioned the word sexual, the NWSL's washing its hands of, well, sorry, they didn't say it was sexual, so not our problem.
Yikes.
Yeah, so like I said, legally, potentially, very strong argument and sound, but in today's environment with everything else, it just is...
well, especially considering...
You would hope they would do better.
Who tends to be the fan base of that league. That's... I don't know. The NWSL has never struck me as a terribly well-run organization, but it's also it's a good case study in what happens when you try to masquerade corporate interests in social justice issues. Like there's this constant tension between the capital and the progress. So
yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, so we'll see how that plays out again. So the higher up we go, right, in the levels is where we start to see more of these issues. But there is also a story in The Guardian really promoting the style of play from SDFC, which we have talked about before. They are a fun team to watch.
They are.
And I'm just mentioning that about, there's been some good things about that, but I don't remember if the news, I think the news happened the last 2 weeks ago when we were there, but SDFC losing Milan Iloski only to have him turn around and end up at the Philadelphia Union that he just signed for. And I had no idea what happened. I initially, my bias certainly got in there and was disgusted and not happy. But I read a good article from Jonathan Tannenwald at the Philadelphia Inquirer, kind of explaining the rules and what happened. And it really seemed like, so I'm going to give my kudos to SDFC here. It really looked like they tried to help work, I'll even say almost work around, find a chink in the MLS rule system to help get him to Philadelphia, because they weren't going to be able, it wasn't that they weren't going to be able to hold him, but the rules and such were going to be, if they held him because he was on a certain salary, FCSC could have him, but then he'd end up on the waiver wires anyway because of the ridiculous rules that MLS has. It's not like SDFC could just easily turn around and sign him. Again, crazy stuff. So what they tried to do is help the player and help kind of skirt the rules slightly by breaking the loan early, hoping that would get him over to the Philadelphia Union where he could sign with a better contract. But because I don't know who's bottom right now, Montreal maybe, but whoever is the bottom has first shot at the waiver wire. So money had to go to Montreal in order to make all this happen anyway. And it's one of the things that, when something like SDFC, my local top level men's team, plays, and I see some of their play and it's attractive soccer, I like it. And every time I start leaning a little bit in one direction, maybe I should go check out a match, like something like this happens and reminds me, like, yeah, why support this in its current form? Why support this?
Yeah, and I totally understand it in the context of the MLS, but I guess that context is kind of the problem. But could you imagine if, like, an Arsenal fan who'd be like, oh, yeah, well, we cut the loan short to help facilitate the move to Spurs or City. It's like, You what now? Like, excuse me? And so I like, again, I understand it's different, but it's just kind of like it reveals a little bit the silliness of all of this, where it's like, oh well, we can't sign him, so we're gonna, make sure he signs for a theoretical rival down the line. Like, it just feels very silly when you say it out loud.
Yeah. And then our last bit of local news, and I kept this instead of including it in our opening stuff when we were talking about transgender issues. But huge shout out to the Xolos organization in TJ for hiring a new coach who happens to be a trans woman, and I was stunned, happily stunned by that. And it might be my stereotypes I have of men's soccer in Mexico. But kudos to them for, I'm hoping, hiring what might have been the best coach to hire, who just also happens to be a trans woman, and not being afraid to hire the trans woman. So I hope that works out for them. And again, huge shout out locally for our region, kind of our soccer region here for that. And was surprised to see. And again, like we talked about before, I will be happy when we don't talk about it, because it's not a special thing anymore. People
Yeah,
are just
absolutely.
hired, and that part of their life can just be ignored. But I think until it becomes more common, and until we get away from all the hate that we have coming down, especially from our federal government, highlighting some of these people who are making these bold moves is important.
Yeah, I had missed that story. That's great.
It just came out today, I believe.
Okay, yeah, and I'm not going to pretend to know anything about like Mexican culture in terms of like the day to day kind of zeitgeist and what things are kind of happening in the culture, but it does feel from the outside as though if Mexico's kind of going through a bit of a progressive swing um, politically. So that's great. I'm glad to hear it, and long may it continue.
Yeah, and then that might have to do with their federal government as well,
Right,
having a
exactly.
huge hand in being able to move in that direction.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yes, kudos to them. Hope everything works out, and we see more, or we see people aren't afraid to make those hires. Not just a hire for hiring's sake, but just because that's someone's life that they want to lead, that doesn't preclude them from doing, in this case, working in the sport they love.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's switch over to lower league news. We're eventually getting closer and closer to our Vermont Green talk here, but before we get that, because that's going to take a little bit of time, some USL1 news. USL1, I forget which season we're in now, maybe sixth season. But relatively young league for USL1. But they reached their 1,000th game over the weekend. Yeah, I guess they launched in 2019, so sixth season. And we also had, and I don't have the video queued up or anything to show, but you can go find it online. We had the second ever goalkeeper goal in League One history. It was Austin Pack from Tormenta FC. He scored an equalizer in the 11th minute of second half stoppage time. Off corner kick, headed the ball in. I don't know if you saw the highlights. Great scenes. But always cool when you see a goalkeeper get a chance to score, especially late in the game.
Yeah, definitely. No, I had not seen that.
So just some, again, news with a group that's growing. We talked about it. I know you weren't on last week, but we did get confirmation before last week's show that the Cosmos and the new team in Eugene, Oregon have been officially announced by USL. So we are up to 21 teams now for the next season. One of the new teams, Atletico Club Boise, they opened up their season ticket deposits. And I don't know if it was one day or however it was, but they set a record. They have 5,500 season ticket deposits for this new team in Boise. Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, that's great. I'm really excited about the addition of Boise, just because one, I think that whole kind of like Mountain West region is a little bit untapped, because there actually is like a lot of soccer culture in that area. But
Yes,
Boise is a sports crazed little city. I think it's about
it is. Yeah.
350,000 people. And you know, I all people ever seem to know, and I'm a little bit guilty of this, is the blue football field because it's pretty cool. But that is a sports crazed city, and they will support the crap out of this team. I guarantee it. So I'm really excited about that addition. But I just had to say, what a wild like thing to hear you say 21 teams in USL League One. I mean, this is like, you remember, like, I think the first year of Loyal, there was like maybe 9 teams in USL League One, and we were all thinking like, how is this sustainable? And now they're up to 21.
Yeah,
So that's
I think it was 10,
10.
and
But
then it
like
might
one
have stayed.
folded or something. Yeah.
Yeah, it might have stayed because I think Fort Wayne, who's going to be coming back and be
Hmm.
part of this 21, I think they were maybe the first year. I'd have to go back and look, but I believe Fort Wayne was in there, and then they elected to step back to League Two, and I think it was
That's
stadium
right.
issues. Whatever was happening wasn't going to be ready, but rather than try to string it out in League One, they elected to self-relegate, basically regroup, and now I don't know if you've seen. I mean, I follow them on Blue Sky, and it's daily they are posting stuff about stadium progress, stadium update. So that stadium looks like it's going to be ready for the
Nice.
season. I believe start of the season, and a brand new stadium, and a team that already now has some history to it because it stayed together in League Two, but will move up to League One. Not on merit, but I'll mention as an aside, I think we're going to do some pro rel talk, like some history of pyramids over the next couple of episodes. We're going to break it down with some things, but I think it's important for people to understand kind of the history and evolution of these pyramids and how we got to where we are now, especially with something like in England, which maybe is the model everybody has in mind. But the pyramid in England didn't really fully take its shape until seriously the last 5-ish years. So it's I think once people understand how things kind of naturally involve in a pyramid structure, might make them have some different conversation in this country as we look at how a pyramid starts to take shape. So that's a
Yeah,
little
I
tease
mean,
for later.
we've talked about it on this show before as well, and I think that England is kind of a hard example to use just because it is obviously kind of the cradle of the game. But a lot of leagues around the world have kind of taken this similar path that the U.S. is on right now. These kind of disparate leagues that get mashed together by the FA. I know Japan, I think recently, or Korea, one of them recently just mashed together a bunch of different levels to create a functioning pyramid, and it was a little weird at first, but it's working. And so we're not. It's not impossible from where we are. There is precedent. We just have to. We do need the bravery to get there, though.
Yeah. All right. Let's finally get to Vermont Green. My first question for you: did you get to either see the final or see any of their games in their run up to the championship?
I didn't, but I suspect I know part of why this is coming up. I did see the Bernie Bayou's tifo. That was pretty great. And I saw that Alexi Lawless was upset about it too.
Yes.
Just that's
Nice.
you're doing something right. Yeah.
Well, yeah, two things. You're doing something right. And seriously, dude, why in what is but I mean, just to be clear, I think we all know, regardless of his political affiliations, which me and Alexei are certainly on opposite ends of the spectrum, but he just shitpost to shitpost
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
to to get in a conversation. And this is one of those things, like, seriously, you just bud out. Let them have their moment in the sun. There's no reason to insert yourself in that conversation in that way. I thought that was just a shitty thing
Yeah.
to do.
Yeah.
But to go back to the
Yeah.
tifo, fantastic tifo for, and
Yeah.
again, I don't have the image to bring up here, but since most people listen to us in audio form anyway, it was a play on, you know, the Bernabeu, but they had Bernie Sanders on there, and it was the Bernie Bayou. And it was great. I mean, Bernie Sanders is a fan of the club. He's been there. He's spoken to the groups at different times. He constantly is you know sharing stuff about them on social media. And so are some other political representatives in and around Burlington, Vermont. But this is a club that had strong connection to its community, and you can go back and watch the game. Anybody can go back and watch the game. It was an exciting game. They finished their season undefeated. But I think what is more remarkable about all of this, and it's not just that they won, and they won, and they won in fairly thrilling fashion again, which they have seemed to do all season, which makes it a more memorable season as well. They were able to do their entire playoffs at home, partly because of their record, partly because they already bring fans. So obviously the USL, when they're looking at people to host these regionalized matchups along the way, want to get in a good environment. You don't want to be on the grass field with temporary bleachers and 50 people in the stands, and not a good place to set a camera. And, it just doesn't come across as a polished kind of thing. So I get some of that was in here too. But for the final, well, let me back up. We talked about this before, that their tickets for the first two rounds of the playoffs, around of 32 to 16, they hosted, games on Friday and then the winners play on Sunday. Those tickets sold out in 4 minutes. Then they were able to host the next round, which were the conference finals and the national semifinals. Those tickets sold out in 30 seconds. Then they were hosting the finals against Ballard FC. And well, we probably won't really talk about Ballard FC much in this particular podcast. Another phenomenal USL2 team that has connected strongly with their community. And just want to give a huge shout out to them, to the great letter they wrote after that they published on social media, congratulating Vermont Green, but also thanking all their fans that traveled across the country. So, I mean, we had some good things going on in USL2, and not just USL2, but in this case, that's what we're talking about. But for the final, I was interested to see, like, tickets were going on sale. They basically said their tickets sold out instantaneously. As soon as it hit whatever time, like 10 a.m., they were going on sale. If you didn't happen to click at the right fraction of a second to be in there, they were locked in. Like someone said, who posted, I saw them, like, I was like, click, 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 so I was in there right when it changed over. And I got in, and they only sell, I mean, the place only holds 2,500 to 3,000 people. And they were like I think they said 1,004th person.
Wow, jeez.
Like they were going to be able to buy tickets, because I don't know, people were limited to 2 or what it was, but they were in, and Vermont Green's like, yeah, they sold out, but they really worked strongly with the community, because there's all these like chain link fences. And there were, by all the reports that I've seen of people there, as many people outside of the stadium watching as there were inside the stadium. They had people lined up already at, I don't know, 8 or 9 in the morning for a 7 or 8 o'clock kickoff. There's already a line before the gates open. There were people there early that treat it like a tailgate, where they're all day. They have a grassy hill with grills, and some people said sofas that people had brought out.
Nice.
Just were out there. And then, I always love when the home team can win a playoff match. I just think it's great, especially for the home fans. I always think it's brutal when the home team loses.
In an atmosphere like
match.
that, especially, you like to see the fans' hard work rewarded.
Yeah, and it was a good game. It was, Vermont Green went up early, Ballard ties it up, and then late in the match, and I think just getting into added time, Vermont Green scores again, and we're able to hold up. But Ballard had chances at the very end, and it was it's fun game all the way around. And I don't care what anybody says, like, nobody wants to watch, fourth tier soccer. It's not fun. It has nothing to do with the levels. We've talked about this with college sports all the time. It's about the fans, really. It's about the atmosphere that is created in the game. And part of that is how well that group, that club, connects with their community. And like we see in college sports, I my alma mater is SDSU, and frankly, for a variety of different reasons, I do not feel SDSU is connected strongly with the San Diego community. They've done some things to really irritate people along the way, but if we look in terms of football, American football, they have had seasons where they've had tremendous success and they get a lot of people, but then those people disappear. But you look at a Michigan and an Ohio State, when those two play each other, or any of the other big rivalries we have around the country, people always show up because it means something. It's important to their community. The overall quality on the field is important in terms of whether you're going to win or not, but it's not the biggest thing. People aren't going there just to see future stars or the best play in the world. They're going for the atmosphere. And the people who make the atmosphere are the fans. And the fans can make this atmosphere anywhere, as we saw in Burlington, Vermont. And it was an amazing atmosphere. I just thoroughly impressed with all the people who showed up. I'm gushing about it because I hope we see more of this around the US and soccer, because it is, I think, fairly easily replicable, and it's all about connecting with your community.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of the big issue for clubs in the past, they haven't had that platform to exist and thrive at that lower level. And now the USL2 has given them that. So you're starting to see these kind of more community focused efforts crop up. And it's great. I have, some things I wouldn't mind changing about USL2, but I think overall it's been nothing but a great thing for US soccer. And we've talked about this before, but I'm not going to dive in on it, but I think we both agree. People who say, "Oh, well, no one wants to watch lower level soccer," are just telling on themselves, really, that they're like
right.
Shitty football fans. But the last thing I wanted to say too, and this is kind of circling back, I did drop a link to the Bernie Bayou picture in our little private chat here. But my favorite comment I saw about that though was that somebody said, I don't even know where they're from, but I wish I had a politician I liked enough to put on a TIFO. And it's like, or that I felt represented enough by to put on a TIFO. And it's like, yeah, that is a good point. So good for Bernie, good for Vermont Green.
Okay, I'm trying to see if I can get this pulled up here.
There you go, I see it,
yeah. Okay. Nope. Lost you there for a second, but there we go. So if you're on, watching it on video, we have it pulled up, but you can easily find it online. And while that's up on the screen, I will also mention that the Green Mountain Boys are the, I believe, official supporter group. They are a supporter group there at Vermont Green. And as a club, which kind of goes into their name of green, they are very big on climate justice and social justice and all kinds of human rights things, which, again, may not work in every community, but works very strongly in Burlington, Vermont. And they have, I think this is another reason they've connected strongly, but the supporter group, the Green Mountain Boys, through part of one of their initiatives of fundraising, were able to raise more than $25,000, $25,107 for migrant justice and the Vermont Immigration Legal Defense Fund. So again, amazing things you can do as a community when you come together and you have a lot of shared values. And I also think, in the light of our federal government and things that are going on, while this may not resonate in every community, I think there's an awful lot of communities, I would argue the majority of communities around the country, that would strongly resonate with a club who stood for some of these same values.
100%. And are you familiar with the story of the Green Mountain Boys, why that's their name and the kind of historical?
I am not, no.
The Green Mountain Boys, just very briefly, were a militia in Vermont founded around the Revolutionary War times that were the guard of the Independent Republic of Vermont for like 2 or 3 years before it was assumed into the new United States. But the Green Mountain Boys have always been kind of a symbol of like Vermont and New England independence and social justice. So that's kind of, it adds a whole
Another
layer
connection.
to the green
Yeah.
thing, right? And so, the Green Mountain Boys they've been one of my favorite follows on formerly Twitter, now Blue Sky, because it's for precisely that reason. They have a very, very strong social justice slant, and kind of like a libertarian streak, but like in the real sense of libertarian, not the like Ben Shapiro nonsense libertarian. So, the Vermont Green and the Green Mountain Boys, really great organization. I love what they're doing up there.
Yeah, I agree. And then, as always happens when you get a successful lower league team, we saw it with Detroit City. Of course, they pushed things because they did want to climb a pyramid and want to see a pyramid. We get conversations about pro rel. I do want to make a comment that I listen to a lot of morning kick around. I mean, in and out. There's stories that I see that I may watch that segment, and I watched Jason Davis do this, and I don't want to. I get his point. He had a segment where he's like, why do people always try to leverage something like Vermont Green into, we have to open up a pyramid and have pro rel? And I thought it was a bit of a harsh take on there. I watched it. I don't know if you saw it at all, but
No.
I was surprised for someone who's generally open to the idea. Like, it just, I think he and some other people, as they will phrase it, get mad at the pro rel zealots, and why are you trying to always use something as a wedge issue? And personally, and again, maybe it's because I would like to see an open pyramid and pro rel. It doesn't bother me as much, but it also doesn't bother me, if someone says it's not a good reason why. I mean, it's okay for everybody to have their opinion. I think that one segment, for as much as I enjoyed a lot of the segments of Morning Kick Around, that one particularly rubbed me the wrong way because it felt a little Alexi Lawless like telling people how they should be thinking and doing. And I just was.
Well, it's the same thing as the whole, like, oh, why do you have to bring sexuality and gay people into everything? It's like, we're actually not. We're just fucking talking about the world as it is. Like, it's very reminiscent of the way culture wars get discussed in modern, like, politics, right? The, like, oh, why you gotta bring politics? And it's like, well, it's a fucking 4th division club that is better run than half the clubs in MLS. You tell me how to talk about that without talking about an open pyramid. Like, it's just, it is annoying. It's like, it's really gross hand waving, and it serves to dismiss. It's really an ad hominem when you get down to it. Yeah. It serves to dismiss the person making the argument rather than engage with the argument. And like, it gets me going, because I remember very distinctly an Austin FC fan once made the argument against an open pyramid because they said, what if my club gets a new bad owner and then we get relegated? Then I'd be stuck in lower leagues with a bad owner. And it's like, Jesus Christ, that might be like the most fucking tone deaf thing I've ever heard somebody say. Like, so you're saying it's a good thing that clubs like Vermont with great owners are stuck in the 4th division. Anyway, I'm getting way off track here. But the point is, like, that shit is annoying. I did miss that bit, but that's some nonsense, like MAGA culture war hand waving right there. It's ad hominem bullshit. And I feel like it's even worse because if you take like half a second and think about what Vermont Green FC is, like, it's a very obvious next question. Like, even if you don't know anything about soccer or the open pyramid, if you've never heard the phrase PLS before, your natural follow-up question to this story about Vermont Green would be, can they get to MLS? And then when you say no, the follow-up question to that is why. It's a very natural conversation. And so I did miss that. That's super annoying because I do generally think the morning footy crew or whatever, morning kick around, whatever.
That was morning kick around, yeah.
Yeah. So they get this hiccup, but that is pretty annoying. I'm glad I missed it.
All right. Well, we have been running a bit long, so we may have to condense our what was going to be our main segment a little bit. Maybe we'll have to pick up on it on another episode. But last week, for those who listened, or if you didn't get a chance, I was by myself, went through a deep dive of player registrations and the transfer market. And part of that, what got me going down that route was this Thomas Mueller coming to Vancouver, and just a combination of things. The crazy rules in MLS of trying to make that happen, and then watching morning footy, which I do a lot of times in the morning, as I mentioned last episode, because I'm retired now and I can make my breakfast and plan my day and have that in the background. Just being on all the summer transfer news and all the big clubs, everything's been focused on the big clubs. So I started looking at some things, which has got me deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole. So that's why we had last week's episode, and we kind of left it with the Bosman ruling in '95 and just how things, at least on a player side, really opened up, and it changed the cap on foreigners on teams, that was no longer deemed legal. So now teams were pretty much, through a variety of different things, teams were, the market completely changed. So let's just put it that way. I'm going to make a couple of comments and then I'm going to ask for your feedback on a couple of things, Dylan. So one thing in between the last episode and this episode that I did, and it's been on my reading list for a while, is I finally acquired a copy of States of Play by Miguel Delaney, which is basically looking at these last 30 years since the Bosman ruling and how big money from wherever it may come has, well, some would say ruined, but shaped football, and really consolidated power around a handful of clubs. And that's really the focus of the book. I'm probably about 3/4 of the way through it right now. I highly recommend it. It's been a fascinating read. And for a lot of the things that I was already familiar with, I didn't necessarily know all the other connections with those things and how some of those decisions in one place, because you hear about stuff, if you're following world football, you hear about the stuff all the time, but maybe not all the behind the scenes connections of a lot of these big decisions and things that have happened. But super short version, right? Premier League started, what was it, 92? And that started to change things because big television money contracts. But the Premier League wasn't really the top league in the 90s. It was the Italian league, and mostly through AC Milan. And again, but this was a time where, right, mid 90s is when the internet, in terms of coming into households, really starts to become a thing. But really before that, it's cable and it's satellite, and there's all these packages which helped bring money into football. But one of the big key changes was Chelsea being bought by Abramovich. And that was like, there was no rule against it in the Premier League. Other people are like, great, bring in a little money and, help a team. And no one, I think with hindsight looking, no one really thought of how this was going to be a first big game changer. But you have all of a sudden a huge change in transfer spending, like driving the market up, because now you got an oligarch who has a ton of money, and for the time it maybe looked at unlimited resources relative to others. But beyond that, as we know, we're getting private investment funds and nation states getting involved in clubs, and how power is attempting, right? There's a strong attempt by some of these groups to sports wash, consolidate power within the clubs they own, to really control the money of the game, and both maximize, maybe not profits, growth, probably better description, but also maximize goodwill, especially among these regimes that have come in to buy football teams to help not just enhance their image, because kind of go through the goodwill of sport, which we've seen, right? People come together for the Olympics, and we've even seen in prior World Cups where wars can stop, during the World Cup. Like, sport a lot of times is a thing that can bring people together, but it also, we're seeing now with money and power and control in the sport of football, of people leveraging this idea of our love for the sport to do what we now call sports washing. So again, the book to me is absolutely incredible. I have found that since I've been reading this book this week, these 2 mornings of trying to watch morning footy, I probably lasted about 5 or 10 minutes. I had to turn it off because of some of the things that I learned, I guess. Yes, definitely. But the connections and seeing the bigger connections, and my brain just goes to like, oh my God, morning footy is joining in the sports washing here, because all they're talking about is the transfers and how they're going to affect about 5 or 6 teams and their chances of winning, the European, like the Champions League at the end of the season. And it's all ignoring all the other stuff that's going on. And I found myself like, so I don't know if it's good or bad. I found myself like, I don't even know if I can watch this anymore. I tell you, after reading the book, and again, I'm not done, it really, I don't know, it's changed my view on some things. So with that, I'm going to kind of go to you. A couple of things I saw in the news to kind of go along this idea. Premier League is on course to break the transfer record this summer. Just saw today, I think it was, that Real Madrid, reports have been leaked out that they were offered a lucrative global tour, like to make extra money above the Champions League, but just to go do their own world tour and ignore the Champions League altogether. But Real Madrid basically said, no, we want to win trophies. But that, like, these are kind of the things that there's the money out there to do that. And then the other thing is, for a decade, I don't know, how long has it been that we're kind of waiting on all this Man City verdict, which just got delayed again a little bit towards, I think now October might be when there's a final decision, which could be points, could be fine. Like, right, we're trying to control. Like, we're celebrating transfers on the one hand, right? Look at all these amazing transfers, how it's going to help this team. But then we don't want the clubs to do this because we want them to follow the rules, the profitability and sustainability rules. And then you got people with money trying to get a club like Real Madrid, something that can be a worldwide draw, to say, fuck the Champions League, go off on your own and just play. So those are 3 kind of key things. I'm interested to get your thoughts on any one or all of those.
I hadn't heard the thing about Real Madrid. I mean, that's kind of funny because that almost harkens back to like the first days of football kind of being spread around the globe, these sort of international tours for money. Obviously would be of huge detriment to the kind of world order of football now. And I think that would probably spell the end of football as we know it in the world if they were to accept that offer. So I'm glad that they didn't. But yeah, I don't see how football isn't ultimately heading in that direction. There's just too much money, and the people making the decisions are not the ones playing the game. And I hate to be that guy pointing out that American business is bad for things, but it really feels like world football is becoming Americanized in the business sense. And that's, partly reflected in the way they only talk about who's going to win the Champions League, not who's even going to qualify, which is, in my opinion, more interesting, but won't get them as many clicks. So yeah, I don't know. It's hard though to be surprised because it's the same thing we see in politics. Like, people always talk about like, oh, MSNBC is like left-leaning Fox. Like, no, it's fucking not. It's owned by the same people who own like all, like the 5 corporations that own everything. And so, like, of course, Morning Footy is going to be talking about the thing that makes CBS more money. Like, it just...
Right, which is the Champions League.
Well, yeah. Right. And so it just kind of like the whole dynamic of the way the Western world is set up, like, just naturally funnels towards this kind of enshittification where everything gets more money but gets worse. So I don't know. I don't have like a whole lot of specific thoughts, but I specifically, even with the multi-club ownership model or the kind of shadow way
Right.
clubs are doing that, like, people keep talking about like, oh, Chelsea are so good at selling their players, they keep getting 30 to 50 million from Saudi Arabia, without mentioning that the PIF owns like 15% of Blueco, who owns Chelsea. So it's like, yeah, no fucking shit that they're getting all these deals from Saudi Arabia. Anyway, the point is that, like, it, in the same way that political media is wholly unequipped to talk about politics in the modern day and age, football media is wholly unequipped to talk about like the modern changes to the game of football, and is going to be wholly complicit in the continued enshittification, you know?
Right. And the modern changes for football, as more and more I've learned through this book, or realized, come to a better realization maybe, is inherently political. The whole
Yeah.
reason for owning some of these teams by these different groups is not just to sports wash, sane wash, whatever group it is that's doing it. It is also to target sometimes a particular club in a particular country because they think that also gives them connections to local politicians to help sway national agendas. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a I mean, God, seriously, read this book. It's disgusting. It really may turn me off forever from the top sport stuff, but there is a domino effect for part of this. And since we focus on grassroots soccer, I mean, one of the complaints is we're getting a higher and higher consolidation of monies at the highest levels. So there's less money to go around. And a perfect example, right, or people trying to chase to catch up with everybody else, which how can you catch up to a nation state with basically unlimited funds? But in trying to maybe go through up the pyramid, or you got other money groups coming in and your normal club can't keep up. We have an example in England of Morecambe FC, which were in League Two, dropped down to the National League, from the last year. They got relegated. But as of 2 days ago, Sunday, I think it was, they officially ran out of money. I think they have till the 20th of this month to, see if they can work something out. Otherwise, I'm not sure what's going to happen. They play with one fewer team. It gets dissolved. They're relegated. It reforms. But these are one of those examples, and I'm sure someone would point out, see, these are the bad things about promotion relegation. But when you look into this, also the owner didn't do things well. The people who were working at the club said, we need to go into administration to save the club. He's like, no, and has basically run the club into the ground. And this is another reason why I love more the idea of fan ownership models, or having them have more control, the local community. Even if you have a wealthy benefactor somewhere in there, it's not all on that person who can, you ride high with them or you sink to the bottom with them because they're idiots in what they do. But you get those stories that people will call out, certainly.
Yeah.
But also,
but real quick, I want to say too, and I know we've talked about this, but the idea that is a reason that an open pyramid is bad is like ridiculous.
Right. I agree with you.
So anyway, we both know why. So sorry, continue.
Yeah. Well, but now I'm going to contrast that with, if you read Miguel Delaney's book, States of Play, I mean, it's awful what's going on at the top in the consolidation of power. It's disgusting, when you read some of these things. And, people talk about, well, what about what's happening with everybody else when you talk about super leagues potentially breaking away, all those things. But at the same time, you get stuff like we covered earlier in the episode, grassroots clubs, other people coming in willing to buy these smaller clubs, not necessarily to climb the community or climb the pyramid, but rather to connect with their community, that they want to do it for their community and be a good steward with that club. So as bad as things might be at the top, and I would say they're pretty bad in terms of what could happen over the next decade and where things are going. But we also have this other story that I saw on the BBC in the last couple of days, and basically it's about non-league football and how the Wrexham effect is trickling down. And that kind of goes back again to those stories we told in the beginning, that people are seeing this idea. And again, as much as you may love or hate Wrexham, I think the power behind the story, the beauty of the story, is that these two people, not from Wrexham, Ryan and Rob, came in and really learned about the community and made sure they connected strongly with the community. They didn't go off in a different direction. They embraced Wrexham. They brought in local people to help do things, especially with their community outreach. They may have brought in people, non-Wrexham people, to help with football operations and build things up. But in connecting with the community, they did a fantastic job. And I think that's the beauty of the documentary series. And that's what people see. And people say, well, why can't I do that? Why can't we do that? We don't have to go to the Premier League. We can just stay here. Maybe we go up a league occasionally, maybe we don't, but we can make it fun. We can connect with our community. We can make it, I mean, like church, right?
Yeah.
You come here and we come together and we celebrate humanity and we watch soccer and maybe we drink some beer and we eat mush peas, right? But we have fun and we celebrate. And I think, one of the things about the Money and Power is it has created all this ability to see things on television. We talked about before, we have the Golazo network, 24 hours of soccer all the time. Never thought I'd see that in my lifetime. We have a show called Morning Footy. We have the internet and the ability to easily now with technology broadcast things on YouTube. The lowliest of the low club can stream all their, unless there's some kind of league requirement against it, like you can stream all your matches to the world. If you're willing to make that effort, you can connect. And I'll leave it with the last thing and get your comments. And we'll link to this article. There's a site I also follow on Blue Sky called Unmodern Football. And Misha is the main guy there. And he wrote a very short article, but said the title, I think, just captures everything for me. The football you love is not dead. It's just somewhere else. And I think that is a perfect, we'll get your comments, but kind of an end cap to most of what we've talked about today. And I think a lot of things we talk about on the show, like, and why I like focusing on the lower leagues, like it's not dead. And yes, problems may be awful and there may be a consolidation of money and power up there, but it's always been our game. It's the people's game. And you and your community can make it be anything you want.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it before. I think Wrexham has been unequivocally a good thing for soccer in the U.S. because it does kind of tell that other side of the story, the not top flight side of the story. And as you alluded to, the way that specifically Rob McElhenney and Ryan Reynolds have been humble as they've gone into Wrexham and let it, win them over rather than the other way around, kind of. So I think it's a good point. I mean, the thing that always comes to mind when we have these conversations about like the football you love is still out there are clubs like AFC Wimbledon or FC United of Manchester, right? Clubs that were formed by people who either had their club taken away from them or felt that their club had been taken away from them.
Right.
And that's another benefit of the open system is people can just go and start their own club if they're feeling disillusioned with their big one. So yeah, I think in the U.S. that statement is maybe a little bit harder to actualize, the idea that the football you love is still out there and you can find it. But it is doable here in the U.S. You might just have to look a little bit harder. And hopefully someday when we have a nice, robust open pyramid, it won't be that hard anymore to find that football you love nearby to home. But yeah, I don't know. I've kind of had a lot of disparate thoughts here, but basically, I think you captured it best when you said that it's the game of the people. Like it is the world's game for a lot of reasons, but part of that reason is that it's so simple. It's so accessible to anybody. Literally, all you need is a round object and some friends. Like you can make the rest work, And so I think, people get lost in these conversations about the level of play or the stadiums or the fan experience or whatever. But it's like at the end of the day, if you get some friends together to watch some football, that's really what matters. So I hope that as people gain a hunger for things like Wrexham, they start to ask the questions and start to hopefully find the answers as to why we don't have that here. So.
Yeah, and I would agree with you. Maybe a little harder in this country and even in our area of the country that can be a soccer hotbed at a lot of the youth levels, may not have the adult levels the same way. It may be a little harder to find for what's already existing, but I think the structures are there in place that you could absolutely, if you're willing and you have enough people, you can make something on your own and make something happen.
Absolutely.
And I've said it before. I think I'm getting closer and closer. I just have to find enough of the right people who are willing. I'd love to start a team in the San Diego County Soccer League and just see where it goes and just have fun. Just
work your way on up.
Make it. And I think, that there will be a way for that structure to be there. But the important thing is find a group of people, find a community, and start, connecting with a wider community and move forward from there. All right. We consolidated a lot of that I was originally planning, but we spent so much time on our earlier parts, which I think was fine. We can pick up some of these bigger issues another time. Before we completely wrap up, I would like to highlight a couple of things. If any of you out there have not started listening to it yet, I think the 3rd episode drops tomorrow. There's a new podcast called An American Game, where they're covering American soccer history. That's pretty cool. You should go check that out and get it in your podcast rotation. I'm not sure if it's supposed to be like a limited series podcast where they're going to have, 6 episodes and then end, or if they're going to be ongoing, because it's going to be hard to do as I think a polished thing they're doing every week, and keep up with it constantly. So I think it's supposed to be a limited series, but if you haven't got that in your rotation yet and you like American soccer history, you should check that out. It's called An American Game. We'll put a link in the show notes. Also, we've mentioned a lot about SASH, the Society for American Soccer History, this summer. They're continuing to produce or put out old videos of American soccer history, different leagues, national teams, and so forth. They have actually started a GoFundMe campaign as well. We'll put a link to that in the show notes, where you can help them kind of offset some of the costs to be able to acquire and preserve more American soccer history. So if you're interested in doing that, again, we'll put the link in the show notes. The TIFO Football by The Athletic has recently done I've seen the first 2. They've done a couple of episodes about global football history.
Yeah, I think they're really spacing them out. I think they just released the 2nd episode like last week.
Yeah, it overlaps a lot of the things we've talked about and kind of goes in some slightly different directions. But that's, again, if you're looking for some history, you have that there. And then I think that was it. Those were the big things to highlight. And again, I can't recommend enough the book States of Play by Miguel Delaney. If you want to learn about some of the things, not for soccer history or grassroots, but what's going on with the money and power and control, especially around FIFA and UEFA and the top clubs around the world. All right,
this is Miguel Delaney, the ex-footballer turned journalist, correct? Those are the same person, Miguel Delaney? Or is the journalist not the former footballer?
I don't know if he's a former footballer. I know Miguel Delaney does, the Libero podcast with Jonathan Wilson and somebody else. But he does a lot of, I would say, more investigative reporting, the politics of football, and really
he's
kind
not,
of
he's not
the
the
protection of football.
Different people, not the same.
Yeah.
Miguel Delaney. All right, that's funny. That's always confused me.
Okay, yeah, good to clear that up for anybody else who might have had that. So as we get here to just about the very end of the show, Dylan, do you have any soccer or sporting plans for the week here before our next episode?
Yeah, we're actually getting right into round 3 of the European qualifying stages. Round 2 ended last week. Round 3 starts this week, and they've actually already made the draws for round 4. So I think that'll come in short order here. So I will certainly be tuning into that this week.
I will as well, because again, I love me a tournament, and I love me the small teams, and hopefully we get some good storylines, even though, well, slightly different, but like a Bodo Glimt making it as far as they did.
Oh yeah.
That in any of those outside of the normal suspects, I also am probably going. I mean, this I maybe slightly touches on all the stuff we talked about tonight, but the World Games start tomorrow. I think it is. Maybe it's Thursday. They're in China, so I'm trying to remember what day, like for us. But the World Games are for a lot of those games that aren't in the Olympics. But I think Paramount Plus is covering a lot of it, and you can certainly find a lot of things on YouTube. They have some crazy games I've never heard of that I find interesting, but this kind of goes along with, there are people who play all these sports around the world, and the beauty of our modern media communications is these sports that may not normally have gotten any coverage or interest, or you may have never learned about them, is because they, the media is controlled by maybe a handful of networks. But now with the internet, we can get things out there, and I'm looking forward to watching some Ultimate and, some other games there that get some play in an Olympic kind of setting. So I'll be checking out some of those. But I think, again, it goes to where if you want to build something like that, you can in today's media rich and communication rich world.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, I think that wraps up another episode for us here on the LGS Pod. If you have a question or comment about tonight's episode, anything we've talked about, please drop us a note. You can leave a comment here on our YouTube channel. You can send us a message on Blue Sky at soccershorts@bigpinedigital.com. Or if you're listening on your favorite podcast app, you can go under the description for this episode and click on the link that's cleverly listed as titled as "Send Us a Text." Click on that link, should be at the top of your description, and send us a question or comment. We always appreciate those and any feedback that you are willing to give us. Better yet, if you're able to join us live, if the schedule works out for us, join us on Tuesday nights at 6 p.m. here on our YouTube channel for the live video broadcast. All right, Dylan, any final comments before we head on out here?
No, if you or anybody who's listening finds a good way to watch those early qualifying rounds, I had to jump between a few sketchy streaming sites. So if anybody's got any good hookups, let me know.
All right. Yes, agreed. Always like to get some of those, as we said, lower cup ties to go check out. All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us on another episode of the Local Grassroots Stories podcast. Good night, and we'll see you next week.